You're very welcome. It's episode 121. That's 121 of The Shortlist. I'm Johnny Campbell, your host. I'm the co-founder and CEO of SocialTalent. And today we're going to be talking about trust. Trust is something that we seem to be finding ourselves with less of these years. These years in 2022, for example, as we broadcast, trust is at an all-time low. Trust in institutions, trust in government, trust in each other. But if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, the trust that comes out top is trust in your employer, and particularly your boss. And surprisingly, perhaps to some of you, trust in organizations beats trust in pretty much every other institution. So it's important, therefore, for us to be talking about trust and its role in leadership. And our guest today is going to be talking about how do you build a culture of trust-driven, inclusive leadership. So it's a really important element when we talk about inclusion and being included. Trust typically pops up, and everyone deserves to feel comfortable, as we say, bringing their whole selves to work, right? And as a leader, it is the leader's job to create an inclusive, high trust environment. Employees are happier, they're more productive, they're more engaged, more motivated when a culture of trust is fostered. Most of us pretty much understand this, but how do you do it? How can a leader build this? Well, today I'm delighted to be joined by DEI expert and social talent author, Vessy Tasheva, about this very topic. And on this week's show, we're going to dig into how do you create trust, especially in the context of the polarized world we find ourselves in today, and how trust-driven leadership is something that needs to be consistently practiced in order to be perfected. Vessy, you're very welcome. I've been watching your training. I was saying to you before the show kicked off for the last 3 weeks, as it's on my current Q4 learning here at Social Talent as a leader. Really enjoying it, finding it very accessible, dying to dig into this topic with you. But maybe you could start by introducing yourself to our audience and explain how you ended up being someone who speaks on this topic and has become very well known and trusted, if you pardon the pun, in this area.
Thanks, Johnny. And I'm delighted to hear that you're actually going through the training yourself. Looking forward to some of your feedback and the leadership team's feedback when you complete the training. How did it start? I think originally as a business, Vessy.com started out of frustration as a DEI and mental health consultancy related to problems I was observing, experiencing in organizations, and I wanted to change that. But more specifically on trust, I am currently training as a psychoanalytic psychotherapist in Trinity College Dublin. So trust is a topic that I examine as part of my dissertation in Trinity. It's something that, I kept revisiting, and why am I doing it? Should I change to something else? And there was always something about trust that kept bringing me back to the topic of trust. I think it relates to two things. On the one side, our own upbringing, how we experience trust. Do we trust ourselves? Do we trust others? Do they trust us? But then working with organizations, whenever, when we do state of inclusion report, we create their DEI strategies. It was never just about, just LGBTQ inclusion or racial diversity or something like that. It was going into deeper and deeper topics. First, it kind of transitioned into transparency, accountability, and then it boiled down to trust. So we kept seeing if there is skepticism towards the leadership team, if people are doubtful of whether there is authentic commitment to DEI, it wasn't just about that. It was trust in place or lack of trust in different aspects of the organization and in different ways towards the leadership team. Now, it's very interesting to turn that around, because a leader can say, oh, what can I do? They just don't trust me. Why are they such, not trusting group of people? They can put it this way. But we can also say, are you a leader that who is capable of containing this feeling? And if people don't feel like they trust you, recognize that and still be able to contain those feelings. Sometimes leadership is compared to parenting, and some people's reaction is, oh, I don't like kids, or I don't want to parent my employees. Let's move away from that. It's not that they're children and you're the parent and you know and they don't know. Or it's not about, there is some potential power dynamics in both cases if one is to maybe come from a position of power. But how about trust? If someone is upset, and you're actually the one, you're the the position the person who has the final decision to make. It is up to you what happens, and it isn't about just being like, oh, you know what, John, I see my decision upset you, I'm just going to change my decision to make you happy. It's not about that. But do I have the capacity to actually hold your upset, help you work through the emotional bits of your upset, because I'm holding it and I'm accepting it, so you're not in danger to be unhappy with me or even angry with me at this moment. So then we can move on and repair from distrust, because now you know that you being unhappy with me is okay, and that's how we communicate, if that's what's happening between us. But now we have a trust-based relationship, right? So you still feel safe. And it's similar when we do performance management. We want people to feel challenged, but they still need to have a sense of safety and stability. So you're challenged just enough that you're getting outside of your comfort zone, but without feeling insecure or threatened.
When we talk today about trust-driven leadership, explain to me why we need to talk about it, as in, what is the alternative, or what have been perhaps the traditional styles of leadership that perhaps didn't focus on trust or didn't engender trust? Talk to me about other alternatives, and perhaps the types of leadership that doesn't focus on trust. Why do we need to focus on this today? What's not working in other types of leadership, and why does that occur?
Yeah, so the other extreme would be kind of fear-based leadership. And that's usually when verbally or non-verbally it's communicated, I'm your boss, you need to do what you're told to do. Or unless you meet those expectations, there would be, negative consequences for you. So there is a power play, and sometimes it can be implicit, and sometimes you would hear people say such things, Now, with trust-based, it's, I trust you're doing your best, and even if you're not meeting the requirements, now it doesn't mean that, whatever you do, we would just keep things that way. But if someone on my team is underperforming, I would still give them feedback, trusting that they can hear the feedback. Maybe we will no longer work together, but I'll say, okay, this is where I've been trusting you. And there is still an opportunity for them to say, aha, I see what I missed. And they can still try to change that, take that feedback on board. And there is someone on the team right now that I shared feedback. And so I didn't say like, this is the end. I left some space to see if they will take that on, but they didn't make the kind of the effort to now, create an opportunity out of the situation. So, they gave up, but I did trust them with, this is how things are happening. And, I think this is where we find each other as humans, trusting each other. So it isn't about making things extremely predefined. We will do those 10 things, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And even in the course, as you mentioned, we look at, okay, it's trust driven, but does it mean it's only about trust? No, it's about empathy. It's about stability, security. It's about self-care. It's about hope. And, creating hope is about trust. Creating, knowing how to look after ourselves, self-care goes back into trust. So there is a lot about containing people's emotions, and then the power of one-on-ones that supports us here. There are two pieces of research that I refer to in the course. One of them is that high trust organizations have 76% higher employee engagement, and 74% less stress. So if I don't feel like, I'm just about to be fired, or if I do something wrong or under deliver or say, or, misbehave in a sense, I will be punished. But rather there is a sense of safety. I still need to do my bit. I am challenged, but my capacity doesn't go into, oh my God, how I'm going to cope with this. Going into our coping mechanisms. I will not eat, I will not sleep, or whatever it is for the person, or overeating, oversleeping, whatever, just so they can push it through to deliver, because they're full of anxiety or depression, whatever way stress impacts them.
I don't mean to go straight to it, but I think it's important to address, right? For folks who are skeptical listening to this, when they're looking at that comparison, Vessy, it's a great comparison, maybe the fear-based leadership, which is, if you don't do this, here's the consequence, versus trust. There's a temptation for cynics to hear that and say, well, okay, is this a no consequence relationship? Is this a situation where you have a boss and her subordinates, and there's no consequence to underperformance or not doing a job? What happens, in a situation where the trust is broken, let's say, or not delivered upon, or the person, maybe there's trust, but the person isn't performing? In that situation, does the person have no consequence? You say that they don't have fear, they feel that they're safe. But how far does that stretch in terms of, let's say a sales job, or a job where you have a very obvious output, and if you're not delivering upon it, is it just, well, it's okay, we all have trust, so everyone's fine, or how far does that stretch?
You know what's funny? That trust-based leadership, it's about the leader building trust. It's not, oh, do you trust your employee? And that's a common pitfall, because what are you doing to deserve people's trust as a leader? Are you transparent? Are you accountable? Are you, are you predictable? Are you trustworthy? And yeah, so okay, some people won't be able to perform. You don't have to just keep people around for the sake of it, by no means. But very often when whenever we have issues related to trust in an organization, it starts in the leadership team. It's because the leaders are not transparent enough, accountable enough. They're not predictable, nurturing enough. They're failing to contain. So this unlocks then, sometimes even very primitive anxieties in people. What is going on in this company? Do we even know where we're going? And that is distracting. So what would it look like in practice? How about we have OKRs? There is full transparency. We know what our mission is, what our vision is, what our values are. We see how the OKRs on organizational level, from leadership level, through every function connect. There is nothing sensitive about it, no legal liability there that can be, created by just having that level of transparency. So people know what they're doing today contributes to their own OKRs or their team's OKRs or to the organizational ones. So similarly, if their leader falls sick tomorrow, let's say their CEO for 6 months, that trust can hold. But if no one is, kind of acting like a whip to force people to do things will fall apart, because the transparency, the accountability, the predictability, the safety, the trustworthiness will be lost.
You talk about 4 principles, and you touched on them a few minutes ago. You talk about trust, you talk about empathy, you talk about stability, and also about hope. Walk us through those 4 elements, and maybe share your views on how they combine together to drive this kind of more holistic, inclusive leadership approach.
One of the most simple practices, and probably most of our audience is already applying, but not thinking about it through those terms, is having one-on-ones. And I think sometimes we have a missed opportunity in one-on-ones when we don't think about it as a way to really foster trust. it does take vulnerability on our side as well, especially when we understand that one-on-ones need to be separate from operational syncs. So if the operational sync is like, hey Johnny, how is this course going? When are we going to launch it? Or what feedback do we have? How are the sales numbers? I'm driving the agenda, and in the one-on-one, you bring the agenda and you tell me, hey Vessy, this is what's going on for me right now. Maybe there are organizational changes that make me feel a certain way. Maybe I feel excited about them. What opportunities might come my way? Or I feel threatened by something in the organization, or maybe I have an interpersonal tricky situation and I need some help there, or just your perspective on things, or mentorship. So the moment that allows for the employee to bring what's actually on their mind rather than what they think they should be talking about, and building a very human relationship there. And people do bring up, oh, there is this project, I have this blocker, but they choose to bring that up. And sometimes the blockers that they talk about might not be operational or organizational. It's something in their life and they just want to share. And that is a blocker that might be impacting their performance at the moment. So the best thing we can do is just to contain that feeling. Now, it's not to say that listening to people's challenges is easy. And I think, again, going into the cynical response, someone will be like, no, we're solutions focused people. We're not about the problems. Before we move into solutions mode, we need to understand the problem. We need to empathize with the problem. If we don't do the emotional work, then we are suppressing that and we're moving into solutions. Short term, it can be more efficient because we saved 15 minutes. We didn't do the emotional type part of the chat, but that person just knows we have no capacity to deal with their emotions. Having any emotions is not acceptable. What we want from them is only productivity, efficiency. Give me solutions, give me business results. You don't matter as a human. Give me purely your analytical, productive self. But, any field, marketing, sales, engineering, we need to stay creative, connected to both our analytical and creative self. So if I'm telling you non-verbally, I'm implying, shut down half of yourself, even if you're not 50% creative or whatever. I'm saying, I don't want you to bring your whole self to work. I will select the pieces and the rest will be punished or at least not recognized. And by ignoring it, that can be also a form of punishment.
So if you're a first-time manager, or you're a manager who has inadvertently been transactional, who only talks about the work done, did we hit our target, etc., what kind of language can you use, or what kind of questions can you ask just to set up this type of one-on-one conversation to start it off again? Because we might have listeners who go, yeah, I get that makes sense, I'd like to do it, but what do you actually say? Like, is it like, how are things going, what's up? Like, what do you ask someone, and what are the kind of questions that work in one-on-one situations, Vessy?
Yeah, so usually if someone asks you, how are you, people just say good, because they know that the question implies they're not interested in hearing how you find. It's just a matter of greeting each other. If you actually want to know how someone feels, you can say, how are you feeling today? What's on your mind? What's going on for you right now? Work and otherwise, right? So how are you feeling today? How are you feeling right now? There is more of an emphasis of the moment rather than just the usual phrase that would like, hi Johnny, how are you? And you'll be like, good. It's just a figure of speech. I'm not expecting you to tell me how you're actually feeling. But let's say we have an employee that maybe is not very articulate when they talk about their emotions, or they're not used to this, or maybe we're new to this type of conversation. So we both always avoid any of this and keep going back only to the operational sync type of conversation, the productive bit. And then what we can do is use a tool that helps us identify the emotions, and that can be as a warm-up tool. In the course, we were looking at a specific tool, and it helps us see. So maybe some of the audience is familiar with the emotion wheel. There are like hundreds of emotions, and through the emotion wheel, you can recognize, it can help you navigate. Like, do you feel happy or sad or angry or scared? It's kind of simplified, but you can go into much more nuanced. I feel humiliated, or I feel excited or joyful. So it isn't just like good, bad. And it also helps people see that when we're overwhelmed, we're usually dealing with a number of emotions at the same time. And some people can be paralyzed in that feeling of overwhelmness. That can impact productivity, among other things, and obviously happiness, engagement, ability to learn. So using a tool like this teaches us to say, okay, wait a moment, what's going on for me? Why am I in this space? Why am I not able to be my usual self? Be curious, be open, maybe calm, courageous, engaged in my learning, or be productive. What's going on? And break it down. Okay, so I feel excited, nervous, a bit down, maybe a bit offended. What else is going on? And this can be from different aspects of our lives, but we don't cease being the other aspects of us when we join a meeting, right? Maybe we had a fight, or we have exciting, I don't know, personal project or something else that we're bringing as an emotion. So breaking it down into emotions and being able to see that they don't cancel each other. We can be brokenhearted and in love at the same time, maybe because of different people. Or we might be in love in different people at the same time, whatever the personal story is. And all of this can be a lot. And just sometimes putting it down, talking it out, helps us structure things. And as a manager, it doesn't mean you need to know about the love life of your employees, but it means you can teach them how to work with their emotions so they are more productive, so that they grow as individuals, so they don't see you just as the person who pays their salary, but someone who is actively interested in their well-being, not some employee assistance program that barely supports them with anything, actually. Because if we look at those, the payment per employee is so low per month that if those programs were expecting people to, let's say, see a therapist once a week, etc., they would be operating at a loss. So that tells us what's really happening there. So really, actually investing in the well-being, the personal growth of people, and them becoming their better selves, they can achieve more in the organization, trust themselves more, as we become more trustworthy leaders at the same time.
I heard a great example last week at LinkedIn Talent Connect. One of the speakers was speaking to this topic of how do you have better one-on-ones that are focused on that well-being and personal health, personal personal well-being, I guess. And they said they use an opener, which is every meeting for a one-on-one, they'd say, "Tell me, what weather are you today? Are you stormy? Are you sunny? Are you cloudy? Are you raining? Are you drizzly? Is it?" And the speaker shared that this was a great device to help really force someone not to be sunny, because you won't go blue skies every day. You're going to go, oh, okay, a bit overcast. And in that, you have license to kind of explain yourself in language that maybe is less confrontational, less emotional. But you're putting yourself, your feelings in the context of weather or something similar to that, which I think is there's lots of great devices. You mentioned the wheel, other ways of doing this, but I think it's the intent that's really important. Talk to me though, Vessy, about when trust is broken, because obviously in a perfect world we have high trust all the time. Everything is great in terms of the engagement, the relationship, but how can a leader break trust? What are the typical ways you've seen leaders can break that trust? And then can you come back from that? And if so, how?
I rarely hear leaders apologize or admit that they've made a mistake. and hold themselves accountable for their mistakes. These are, in any other relationship, we'll just say like, sorry, I messed up, or sorry, I was wrong. We don't hear leaders do that. And there is a taboo that if they admit any fault, people will think less of them. But it's not about perfection. We're all imperfect. We all make mistakes. We can't always say or do the right thing. So just when something happens, so we're not doing it in pursuit of perfection. We're doing it in pursuit of being trustworthy human beings. We're transparent and accountable, and there is a level of predictability and security, and it's nurturing. And if and we fail people, and we do that in every type of relationship at one point or another. It depends how often we do it, and if we do it too often, and we don't show actions to compensate for that, then people just run out of capacity to trust us anymore, right? It's a bit like a bucket. Do you add to it, or do you keep taking away? Are you giving or taking, and are those things in balance? So if you make a mistake, and essentially you're taking away from that bucket of trust that was put in you, do you apologize? And that's a way to get some of that back. Now, it's not just the action for the sake of action. It's about genuinely apologizing, but firstly, understanding what really went wrong. I see a lot of leaders struggling with self-knowledge, where when feedback is shared by the employees, let's say we're creating the state of inclusion reports, and we have these findings, these are how your employees feel, these are the numbers, quantitative and then qualitative research, and this is the picture, and this is the margin of error and the confidence rate, because leaders are like, show me the numbers. Well, here are the numbers. And when leaders don't like what they see, they start to discredit the data. They'll be like, this margin of error is too high. Or how about, this is a month old or 3 months old report now. Well, but you were not showing up for the brief calls earlier, right? So who is at fault? So we all have defense mechanisms. Every single human, it's just human to have defenses. But are we people who are aware of our own defenses that we tend to put in place, or do we get defensive? And even if I get slightly defensive, do I say, actually, you know what, I just went into defense mode, this is what I do, let me come back to it, let me just listen to you, what do you have to say? And it will be hard for me to hear it, but let's create this space. So trust in an organization is limited by the capacity of the leader to know the truth about themselves and to trust themselves. And here we go into kind of deeper concept of, is the leader living their true self or a false self that, maybe they picked up from society throughout their upbringing, maybe it's influence of religion or their own family, or, everything together, it doesn't matter. But we are the products of somewhat of our own personality and somewhat of the environment that we were brought by, and all of the work opportunities in between that eventually made us a leader. So it is extremely uncomfortable, and can be even painful to hold the mirror of seeing what one is actually dealing with.
And you talk about this in your training, this concept of self-care when it comes to trust-driven leadership. So what is that? Is that the equivalent of, on an airplane, putting your oxygen mask on you first before children? How does that look like, Vessy, in terms of this concept of self-care and examining yourself? How does one do that?
Yeah, so I think the comparison with the mask on the airplane is really good, because essentially we're not throwing someone else under the bus to save ourselves. It's about to be able to help someone else, we need to be in a good place. So we need to feel contained to be able to contain someone else's feelings as well, right? So if I am completely overworked, stressed out, approaching burnout, and I have a one-on-one with an employee, and they feel anxious or worried or depressed, whatever is going on. Maybe it's about a project or 2023, whatever, or something in their personal life. I will have zero capacity to help them feel contained, even just for 5 minutes, if I don't have that capacity within myself. So how do we practice it? Maybe for someone it's a hike in the mountain on their own. For someone else might be a hike in the mountain with their family on the weekend. For someone it could be doing their meetings while walking around their house if they're remotely working, or in their office. It's very individual, but again, it requires self-discovery. Curious to know first about yourself.
You mentioned walking around the house if you're remote working. I want to pull that thread a little bit if I can, Vessy. A lot of people have shared their challenges of remote or hybrid working, and particularly leadership has, come under a lot of pressure where folks felt the traditional leadership models didn't adapt well to remote, or they couldn't adapt them themselves. Is there a difference when it comes to building trust in remote or hybrid situations? And if so, what are those differences, and what are your recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, the distance and proximity, physical proximity can impact things. So an example from a recent workshop, usually people join remotely over Zoom. So every participant has an identical experience. They're with their laptop and they join. But we had 3 people happen to be in the office on that day, and they were joining from the same computer, and everyone else was joining on their own. And one of the people who was joining on their own, I guess they were also in the office. They said, "Oh, which room are you in so I can come over?" Immediately that creates, kind of imbalance, because now it becomes the thing, as if it's everyone is better off being there as a group. Now, actually, I told them, hold on, for this is a workshop. You're actually better off having the screen to your own, being able to see it up close. I need to be able to see it. It's interactive. We cannot have 3 people on the same screen. But this is what happens in a hybrid setting, when some people have availability to be in the office more, and some need the accessibility of working remotely. Maybe these are neurodiverse people, maybe they're people with disabilities, maybe they're parents or caregivers, or just introverted people who just prefer to have the nice and quiet focus time working from home rather than doing the commute, etc. So what happened in some companies is that male leaders were tired of sharing their living room or bedroom or their house with their spouses, who tend to be looking after their kids, and they said, well, we need to go back to the office. So and then you end up with offices where it's mostly male colleagues that go to the office because they're happy to kind of leave the caregiving responsibilities to the female members of their family. And that actually created further imbalance, not just in the workplace, but in society. So then, people who tend to get promoted more easily in general because they are similar to their leaders, spend also more face-to-face time with their leaders. So how do we come back from that? We need to be very conscious. We need to be very thoughtful and intentional with communication when we have remote working or hybrid setting. And okay, if let's say, Johnny, you and I work in the same office and we have the flexibility of being there 2 days a week or even 5 days a week, and other colleagues don't have that, do we make the intentional, thoughtful effort of scheduling time with them for one-on-ones to have that quality time? Or if I have a beer with you in Cocoa Tree, it's like, well, we just happen to be there. But if someone else doesn't go to Huckletree, they don't have the social catch up with you, they don't have as much visibility on their own projects, they don't get to know you more as a person and kind of build a more friendly relationship. So their career is impacted by that. And they would probably feel, you know what, some people are thought about and are top of mind for promotions or career opportunities. And if you don't show up, it's not as supportive of environment. And then support is an aspect of trust.
It was interesting you mentioned the differences in gender. Again, there was data shared by LinkedIn with us last week, which suggests that women are 24% more likely to apply for remote roles than men. And again, it shows a bias. We only hypothesize on the origins of this or the whys of this, but the data is very strong that suggests that there is an imbalance between those who wish to work remotely or require that access. And again, it's being thoughtful. It's stopping and thinking and not just seeing your own perspective on these things.
Yeah, well, you're less likely to be sexually harassed if you work from home, or at least there is a bit more control, distancing. If let's say the culture is more toxic, you can just switch off your camera, leave the room, try to forget about it. If you're in the office and you're dealing with this, that's much harder. But then it's typically women. It varies slightly from country to country across Europe. There are studies, but overall, it always falls back on women to be caregivers, be that to children or elderly members of the family or people with disabilities in the family. So women end up being at home. So it can look like it's their choice, but it can very much be that they're expected to do that. So
do you think there's a challenge when it comes to trust, Vessy, that we started the pandemic perhaps by setting expectations with some people that remote or full hybrid would persist, and then the last 12 months, even particularly the last 6 months, a lot of companies have had to change their policies. Do you think that's been a damaging thing? And if so, how does a leader deal with that when perhaps it's not her decision, it's the company, but she has to then break the trust that has been set by the company with her team in changing the rules to maybe enforce them to be in 3 days or 2 days a week or whatever that might be? Is that a challenge today for folks, do you think?
Yeah, and it puts the leader in a very hard position. If, in your example, if she actually disagrees with the practice, but she has to introduce it to the team. I think holding that ambivalence is again about containing. So to be able to acknowledge that, okay, this is the reality. It doesn't sound like in the example that you're giving there is any flexibility. So this is our reality. I'm not happy either, but this is what we need to do. So being able to contain the upset of the employees. Of course, there are boundaries. If you start every meeting and employees only complaining every single time, you'll be like, okay, we talked about this. Now it's time to move on. And we have talked about this, right? But we're not trying to just push it aside and pretend it's not happening and say if you don't come, you will be fired. That kind of black and white situation. But it is very hard for leaders when, let's say, a team lead, when the company is not interested in understanding how it impacts people's lives. Some people have joined the company throughout the 2 years of the pandemic. So if you joined part-time or you joined, let's say, hybrid or remote, and now I'm telling you, you need to be in the office when we only allow full-time, you never signed up for that. So that's maybe 20-30% of the company due to attrition rates over the last 2 years, which would be natural in any company. There, it's dynamic. And we see high numbers of people switching companies because of those specific reasons. I think it's a shortcoming on leadership teams that want to be in the office, sometimes for personal reasons, sometimes because they're used to it. It's very easy to fall into the status quo. and it shows lack of trust in their employees. And I think it's hard to believe that other people were accountable if you're not accountable yourself.
I like what you're saying in terms of, if I'm hearing you correctly, Vessy, this isn't about leadership through fear, but it's also not about leadership through pandering to everyone's needs. Trust isn't either of those things. And the analogy, if it works for you, that comes to mind to me is friends. Friendship, let's say friends versus family. Family, you can't unfortunately sack your family. They are your family forever. That's just the way it is. But your friends, we do, pardon the phrase, sack our friends sometimes. Somebody we decide is not going to be our friend anymore because we don't like what they do. We don't trust them, let's say, anymore. And trust is something that takes a long time to build with friends. It can be eroded very quickly. And again, the way to get it back is to apologize often. But there is an expectation of a friend that you have to give to the relationship. If it's all one-sided, you can walk away. Again, to your point around an employer, there is a consequence. Perhaps family is a bad analogy because you kind of can't walk away. Family is family. Don't typically walk away. But friendship, does friendship work for you as an analogy in terms of trust-based leadership? Again, or what do you think?
In certain aspects, I guess in a friendship we would expect equal authority. They're equal friends to each other unless there is a power imbalance. Yeah, in a family, we can say, oh, we're stuck with each other, but in either case, working through is the key. Let's say in a family, you have a member of the family that comes out. Some people can shut them out, others can accept them, and there is also the middle ground. Okay, there is a member of the family that's kind of struggling to understand, to come around, but maybe they still want to. So how do we work through this? And it's similar in therapy. There is something that maybe we want to change about ourselves, or we understand we have like a specific coping mechanism or a defense. We want to work on it. We have no idea how to do it. And it's just working through that eventually we get on the other side. And building trust, maintaining trust, repairing trust, it's about working through. But usually we just think about shortcuts, especially in business. We're like, what are the low-hanging fruits? There is no low-hanging fruit with trust. So short term, that will make you very impactful. But another 6 months down the line, or another 6 months down the line, you will pay a higher cost. It becomes like a legacy code. People understand legacy code, but they don't understand DEI legacy or trust legacy.
I love that. There are no shortcuts in this. You got to work through. Vessy, you've been very generous of your time today with us here this afternoon here in Dublin as we broadcast live. I'm going to ask you for one more piece of advice, though. I wonder if you could leave us with advice for our listeners today, whether it's advice that's been passed on to you by somebody else or it's something you've gathered from your own vast experience and knowledge. What would that piece of advice you'd like to leave our audience with here today be?
Yeah, go inside and go deep. We live in a society that's all about, everything is on demand, everything is about quick, takeaway, everything is about immediate consumption. Growing as a person, growing as a leader, building meaningful relationships, finding purpose that's actually, contagious. People want to stay with your company, even if you run out of funding, but they want to stay there because they believe in the mission. That's coming from trust. Ideally you didn't run out of funding by that time, but that is when you know yourself, when you have found insight and you went deep. But also it's not it's the habit of doing that. It's not you don't go from A to B and that's the end of the journey. It's about strength of a continuous self, if you want. So we constantly rediscover ourselves. Who we were 5 years ago is not who we will be 5 years from now. So having the strength to continue on that personal journey, to be better leaders and just better people.
Vessy, I love that. And thank you. And if folks want to contact you to know more about the work you do with organizations, to help you provide the workshops you run, how can they find out more details?
Yeah, Vessy.com. You can find everything there.
Vessy.com, all you need to build trust with your
Okay.
team and organization. Vessy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today and share your insights. It's been a pleasure completing your course. I have one more section to complete before my deadline tomorrow. I'm looking forward to giving you feedback once we're done. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Johnny.
And thank you for joining us to listen today. And hopefully that's inspired you on how you can be a better leader, how you can bring trust into the equation to drive a more inclusive environment as well. And you can move away from being perhaps that fear-based leader to a much more inclusive, trust-based leader. We'll be back next week. Our show rolls on to episode 122. Do join us next week. We'll be live on YouTube and LinkedIn. If you want to join us at 4 p.m. Ireland, UK time, that's 11 a.m. on the East Coast of the US, 9 a.m. On the or 8 a.m. on the West Coast. I'll be joined by Charo Malhotra. Charo is somebody I've known for a long time. She's a leading HR and employer branding expert, has worked with tons of businesses from Nestle to McKinsey, and she's going to be talking to us about how to communicate company culture through employer brand. And Charo is somebody I've known who's really been a passionate advocate for the power of employer brand, but not only an advocate, she's lived it for massive brands, driven the changes, executed on those changes in those big organizations on driving really powerful employer brands. And she'll be sharing with us her secrets next week on the show. It's episode 122. That'll be live on Wednesday, the 9th of November on your podcast app by the evening time, if you prefer to listen to the podcast. Or again, you can join us on YouTube/SocialTalent or LinkedIn on my personal profile /in/Johnny Campbell as well. Or you can find that and any other previous episode and links to our future episodes at socialtalent.com /the shortlist. We'll see you next week.